Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything, from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Bryan McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal.
We have recently built the NavLab, a test bed for research in robot navigation, image understanding, and the role of human interaction with intelligent systems. The NavLab is a roadworthy truck modified so that researchers or computers can control the vehicle as occasion demands. As a mobile navigation habitat, it accommodates researchers and significant computing on board. Because it is self-contained, the NavLab is not subject to telemetry bottlenecks, communication faults, or dependence on stationary infrastructure, and can travel to confront navigation problems at a test site.
All right, everyone, that is the Nav Lab. So that was produced by Carnegie Mellon in 1986. The Robotics Institute was building self-driving cars, and it was a huge, almost like beefy looking van. And inside they had full-size computers and researchers basically having the van drive itself. It's self-driving cars and that kind of stuff has gone back a really, really long time. And that's basically what we're going to talk about today. Good morning, Dee. Can you believe today is our 100th episode? 100 episodes since we started during lockdown in 2020. How do you feel about it?
It's interesting. I feel like it just kind of snuck up on me. In some ways, it feels like we started this podcast like 2 months ago, and it's just like it feels like the last 2.5 years or so was like this weird memory hole where it was like in some like other reality.
Yeah, I mean, we started this because, well, for one, we always wanted to do it. And I think we were so busy all the time that we just never really put the time and energy into it. And then when the pandemic began and lockdowns happened and we were both stuck at home, we thought, well, we might as well order some equipment and just start doing this because work slowed down a tad for a couple of months. And then suddenly work ramped up quickly and we just learned how to weave and navigate our schedule by doing this weekly. And the thing about it is that I have found more joy in doing this than I'm found doing most things. And I think the reason is because we get to get all this information and creativity and stuff like that has been building up for, gosh, we've been running this business for 18 years now, out to the public, letting people reach out to us and communicate about it and challenge us and help us think differently. And I've just had a tremendous amount of fun doing it. And we don't get paid doing this. We just do this because we love it and we just want to get this information out and just talk about different topics and that kind of stuff, right? What do you think though, Dee, that we have done right or done correctly? And what do you think we could be doing better?
Well, I feel like one of the nice things about this podcast is it is our own voice getting out, and most of the other work that we do ends up going through so many different hands and transformations and everything between when we work on it and between when it gets to market. It still kind of feels like us, but it feels like it's been through so many different things since we left it. So it's I really enjoyed that this is something that we can get our own perspective and our own thoughts out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's ultimately what we've done right is we've been authentic to what we really think about things and what our actual beliefs and thoughts are and our own values when it comes to product and markets and all of these things. I think that it took us a little while to kind of figure out some format stuff and how we are kind of interspersing, focusing on whatever a major topic is and deep diving versus just talking about what are the major news stories. And that mixture of things, I think, is ultimately kind of what is working best for us.
Well, I remember when you had reached out to me and you said, hey, we've been doing all these deep dive topics. I think the first year and a half or so we did deep dive topics and people really liked them. But then also we got a lot of feedback of like, hey, like, let's talk about some of the more recent more recent topics that are out there, things that are happening in the news. And so you and I talked about it. And we're like, yeah, why don't we just weave it all together? There's no rules here, right? Like, if we want to do a deep dive topic like we're doing today, talking about self-driving cars, we do it. If we want to talk about something more topical that's happening, in the news, then we do that, and we think, and I think that people listen to us because our perspective is actually quite unique. We are not engineers. we work with engineers, but we are on the side of the user. We're on the side of the experience that's being created by the products that are being developed here in Silicon Valley and beyond. And so I think that's what makes it interesting. I would say, though, that some of the things that we could do a little bit better would be to maybe push our guests a little bit. Some of our guest interviews that where I've pushed a little bit and said, wait a minute, let's go a little deeper on this, a little deeper on that. I felt like they've come out more interesting. They've gotten shared more with others because more information came out that was useful and insightful. And then the ones where it was a little more topical, where I just kind of asked what was going on and what they're up to and what they do and that kind of stuff, they were great. But later I'd get off the interview and go, I should have asked this or I should have asked that. So I think it's all just a learning lesson, right? Of like, as you evolve and grow in podcasting, is you want to do deeper interviews at certain times and more topical ones in others.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what was your favorite episode up to 100? So, which is the one that really stands out that you loved?
Well, the one that I always think about the most is probably the interview of Paul Scanlon from Legion M.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I mean, we care a lot about movies. I think narrative is actually really important to the work that we do in product and in research, and understanding how narrative is built and structured and how it communicates and how people process it. And hearing him talk about his process and how they're kind of bringing some kind of tech concepts into how they are selecting and producing films, I thought was fascinating.
yeah. That's a super interesting one. I actually share that one with most people when I talk to them, and they say, "Hey, what episode would you recommend?" I say, "Hey, you got to listen to this one." And that's an example of one where I push Paul a little bit. And I said, "Hey, wait a minute, but what about this? What about that?" Because him and I are friendly, and so he didn't mind at all and had fantastic responses to all of my questions. When I think back, Paul's is definitely right up there. I really enjoyed the two that we did with Justin Graham in Hawaii
Mhm.
because I thought it was really interesting to understand the perspective of filming, like on location, using drones, working on feature films from the perspective of somebody who is filming one angle, like the drone
Mhm.
angle or out on a jet ski in the water and stuff like that. And I think our audience did as well because his episodes had some of the highest numbers. And so
Yeah.
I really enjoyed those. And also, it was really great to reconnect with our GoPro friends. That was pretty awesome. We hadn't talked to them in a long time, and to get them on the podcast talking about what it's like to be a GoPro and to build those cameras and stuff, I thought that was super fun too.
Yeah, I think when we first started this podcast, one of the reasons why we did it, at least the reasons why I wanted to do it, was because feel like any time that someone talks to someone in Silicon Valley, it tends to be an investor, um, and or maybe every now and then you get someone who's coming from an engineering perspective, but that even seems to be the minority. But I feel like one of the things that makes Silicon Valley different than a lot of other industries out there, especially when it comes to product development, is this user experience perspective. And I don't feel like that was very well represented in like the podcast space or the media space. So talking to, getting our perspective out there and talking to those UX professionals who are working in product design, like our friends over at GoPro, I think that's a perspective that can be better understood. And I'm glad that we're getting that out.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump into our topic of the day, one that I'm actually really excited about because there's been a lot of advancement and kind of progress in the area since the last time we talked about it. We're going to talk about self driving cars today. Specifically, I want to talk about the Waymo Uber partnership,
Mhm.
where other competitors are right now, and what it means for users who are torn about this new technology. I find the last part super interesting because of obviously our background in psychology, but um, not everybody's on board with self-driving cars. I am. I like them. I think they're super cool. I think in the future that's what we're going to be using to get around, especially, my son is 8 years old, going on 9. By the time he gets his driver's license, that might be a thing of the past. I don't know. But I find it super super interesting to be living in this time right now. Also, I have a big prediction today. But I'm going to wait till the end to give it to you because I feel like I might nail this one long term. And if I do, we're going to have to go back and talk about it afterwards. So, anyways,
Okay.
let's jump right in. So, I want to start off with some facts as of 2023. I think this will be helpful for everyone who's listening. So there's a bunch of different companies that are doing self-driving right now, and more and more keep showing up. Right now, kind of on the, I would say the top, because they're actually getting to the point where they're actually driving consumers around. Consumers aren't paying; it's free for them right now, and that's part of the regulation stuff. Is Google's Waymo. Now they've logged a million miles with no driver assist. So that is technically level 4, even though we might classify it as level 5 because it's fully autonomous, but it's level 4 because it's geofenced with certain locations. So it happens to be in Phoenix and San Francisco, and it's in areas where the car is driving slower, not quickly. There's a lot of complexities to the level 4, level 5, and how they deal with regulators. But we'll talk about that. Uber, they dropped out. And I don't know if everybody knows this, but their autonomous vehicle unit was sold off in 2021. And we saw them all around the streets here in San Francisco, and I'm in San Mateo, everywhere for quite some time. But they just kind of pulled out of that space. It's a very expensive space to be in. And so I imagine it wasn't working for them financially. You have Apollo Go, which is Baidu's autonomous ride hailing service. They provided around 660,000 rides in the first quarter of 2023, up 236% year over year. And they are in Hong Kong. So that is just killing it overseas. Cruise, another one that you might see around, completed 1 million fully driverless miles in the 15 months since it started offering fully driverless rides. All these companies are kind of doing the same thing that Waymo is doing, where it's all controlled and regulated and that kind of stuff right now. Tesla, it's kind of in a category of its own. It's really interesting. Tesla is currently active for level 2. So level 2 is where your car can do the steering and acceleration, but the driver, must be ready to take the wheel. They claim that they're going to go right to level 4, but this happens all the time with Elon, and we haven't seen it yet. So it's kind of not in the same category as these companies that are developing services, where they're actually like going around and picking users up, taking them to locations and stuff. Tesla essentially wants to take all of its vehicles, enable them as fully autonomous, and then allow the person who owns the vehicle to rent it out, when they're not using it, to other people and that kind of stuff. It's really interesting. But we're not going to dive deep into that today. I want to talk more about the market itself. And then the last one on here, and I know there's more, but is Zoox, which is Amazon's self-driving unit. They are actually right next to me. I see Zook every single day of my life. They're all over the place. I constantly have to go around them. They're currently active at level 4, and they're used for short trips, but they actually did a really interesting thing. So they don't have a steering wheel in their vehicle. And their testing is done locally, just like the others, but they also do kind of like private campus tests, I heard. So, like, for
Mhm.
example, Hewlett Packard, those types of companies, they have really big campuses. So it'll pick up like employees and drive them around and stuff. And that's how you get more miles. Um, so, any thoughts kind of on this landscape, D? Kind of a lot going on, to talk about before we talk about this Waymo Uber partnership.
Well, there's a couple things. I know that Waymo has been doing this for a very long time. I remember talking to somebody who was working working with somebody who's working in this group. I want to say over 10 years ago now, um, and they've made significant progress. I think this is one of the things when you get to when the first real company gets to level 5 in a way that fully appeases regulators and um, doesn't have any major issues like significant fatalities, that first person to market is going to end up kind of owning that space. I think this is one of the few areas in which there's a true first mover advantage. I think most of the time, whoever moves into a space as far as technology ends up kind of like showing all the discovering all the wrong things to do, and then somebody else
Yeah.
comes in and takes it over. Kind of like Friendster with versus MySpace and then Facebook. Uh, in this case, I think as long as because it's an underlying fundamental like functional utility technology, I think whoever comes out with something that works and works well and isn't associated with major safety issues is just going to own the space, and they'll I'm if I were to assume that it's Waymo, which I think is kind of has a lead in this area, Once they get to, level 5 full self driving, they'll license this out to all of the
Hmm.
different automakers who aren't developing themselves, as far as we know, is most of them, and those kind of have that kind of Windows Microsoft model, and that will squeeze almost everybody else out of the market.
See, I don't know if I fully agree with you. And I'll tell you why. I don't know from a consumer perspective, D. Okay, let me put it this way. I agree that the first mover, like Google's Waymo, and I actually think it will be Waymo, is going to
Mhm.
grab a large market share. But from a user perspective, I mean, you bring up an app, an autonomous vehicle shows up. Do you really care if it's a Waymo or it's a Cruise or it's any of the others? Right. So if you have
Now,
five of them and they all kind of land roughly around the same time, is there any reason why you get? Is there a different quality or something of a Waymo versus a Cruise? Or why don't I just take the one that appears to be the cheapest or the closest?
well, I think this is one of the reasons why it will become kind of one model meets all. Especially, there's two different things here. There's the ride hailing service, and there's like your cell phone to vehicles is self driving.
Yeah.
So if it gets you from place to place, other than there are certain ethical concerns when it comes to a company like Uber for sure. But uh, one of the reasons why I think it will become uh, kind of commoditized and one company will kind of own the space is because people won't care that much.
Hmm.
Because when it comes to it being integrated into your existing car, then you just go with the one that has the best brand name because it becomes assumed, and this might not always be true, that it is the safest and most mature. It's not really the kind of thing where you're like, all right, well now let me try out this other service that I've heard about that's new. That usually ends up being the case. You're like, well, this gets the job done. Why would I try something else out, even if it's marginally cheaper?
Hmm.
So I think when it comes to like being integrated into your own car, that's probably ultimately the way people are going to go because it's a licensing agreement. Somebody's going to license from whatever's the most recognized, and there's probably not going to be a significant cost saving for licensing somebody else's technology.
Uh-huh.
Uh, when it comes to to ride hailing services, that's where there can be a bit more competition, and we'll see how that that plays out. But I also think that's kind of a space where there's probably, in the end of the day, not going to be a ton of different competitors.
Well, let's talk about something for a second here. So I want to take you back on memory lane for a moment when you and I were at in Las Vegas for CES in, let's say, 2000. I think it was 8. I
Mm,
believe we went in 2008 the last time, or 2009. Um, oh, sorry. What am I talking about? Sorry, 2018, not 2008. We were
2018.
there in 2000, 2008. I was probably there too. But
You're
no,
showing your
2000.
age there.
I know 2000, 2018.
You're
So
mixing up your
okay,
decades.
I know exactly. I keep thinking about like Waymo starting in 2009, but we'll talk about that in a second. So when we went back, we got off the airplane, we walked outside, and anyone who's been to Las Vegas airport knows that if it's not a busy time, you walk right outside, and then there's like Ubers and taxi cabs, and
Mhm.
everyone's just kind of waiting for you. We got outside, and the line was 500 deep. And you and I were like, okay, this is going to be like a couple of hours, just like standing in line waiting for cars to come and that kind of stuff. And you stand there, you wait, someone drives up, and they pick you up, and then they take you to where you want to go in the car. You and I were like, well, which direction are you going? And they're like, oh, we're going to go through town, or we're going to go through this. I find it, if you had 100 of those cars lined up and everyone just walks into them, and then suddenly they all follow each other and take off and get you to where you need to go. It's a big business, D. I think it's a
Sure.
huge, huge business that's going to need a lot of competition and a lot of players in the market. And I can't imagine that only Waymo, for example, would have, 1,000 cars in, LAX and Las Vegas, right? Just sitting there waiting. And all these other competitors aren't going to be right on their heels, and there won't be like an app that allows you to kind of hail any of them at any given time, or just some other shift in the way that we approach getting cars. That's why I kind of wonder if there will be a winner, or if there's going to be a first mover, but the first mover is going to quickly get squeezed by the fact that there's like five companies trying to jump in on this $1 billion opportunity.
Yeah, I think number one, when thinking about something like CES in
Yeah.
Vegas, where everything's pretty close together, um, as far as the geographic distribution and things like that. It's almost like kind of like cars are not the answer. It's almost like, all right, let's get a Lime scooter. That's probably better because
Yeah.
the squeeze is actually being able to fit all of these cars into the pickup and drop off locations.
Hmm.
On the other side of things, I'm thinking about a different business model. Imagine instead of, and I think this might be the way it goes because it's kind of one of the things that Google has done with Android, for example, and with a bunch of their other software. Imagine instead of Waymo building all of their own vehicles, they just license the technology to Lyft and Uber.
Yeah.
So they already have a user base. They already have a huge install base of their apps. They are desperately seeking a way to reduce their costs because their business model doesn't really work out from a financial standpoint. They are
Hmm.
kind of dependent on getting to that. If you're Uber and Lyft, why wouldn't you both just license from the one, especially if the one company is like, all right, well, because we're going to be doing such numbers, we're going to lower our prices for licensing and squeeze out competitors.
Yeah, but I don't understand what you mean by licensing. Meaning that if you're licensing the technology to Uber, that means Uber still has to buy and outfit all the vehicles.
Well, I mean, Uber kind of does buy and outfit vehicles.
Yeah, I know, but they're so they have a weird model because it's like you have to have your own car, right?
You
So you're
don't,
basically
not
saying
necessarily, not
no.
necessarily. I mean, we've talked to people like who were basically leasing cars from Uber, and people don't talk about this that much, but we've definitely experienced where people were leasing cars from Uber and then they were paying monthly to Uber, which I think is probably a terrible financial decision on the part of the individual. But Uber does buy and outfit cars that they are then provide to drivers, and they have been looking for a long time to cut the driver out of this process in order to save themselves money. So I can totally see themselves going buying a fleet of vehicles, especially because
Hmm.
they can probably figure out a way to get it on the cheap. They're already kind of doing this dealership model or the for cars, this leasing system for cars. So that infrastructure is already built into their company.
Hmm.
Now they just have to kind of license the technology and get it installed into their fleet, and
So you're basically
they're off
going
to the
back to
races.
what Travis Kalanick said in the early days of Uber, which is he said, once at the time he was talking about Tesla, but he said once Tesla becomes fully autonomous, I'm going to buy 1 million vehicles, and then I'm just going to basically send those vehicles out under the Uber brand.
Yeah, I think that has been the goal for a long time, and they've been trying to just stretch things out. And the pandemic and opening up Uber Eats and that kind of stuff definitely helped because I think that has better margins. But I think that totally makes sense for from a business model perspective rather than we both know number one, Google isn't really focused on and on building hardware. They have some hardware products like some of the Nest products and some of the I mean they're building a few Waymo cars and they have
Hmm.
the Google Pixel phone and stuff. But for the most part, all of their revenue comes from software.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of their company culture. I think that's their perspective. I don't think going from building, Google Pixels to building a fully moving vehicle that can house human beings at a level of scale that we're talking about is a major undertaking. It's one of the reasons why Tesla has hit so much challenges because getting their production up to levels that can compete with like the Volkswagens and Toyotas of the world is a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
It makes a lot more sense and they can hit a lot. They can take command of this market by going the licensing route like they did with Android.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's talk about Waymo for a second now. First of all, I don't really like the name, to be honest with you. Like
Neither do I.
it's a little weird. Like I feel like it should be
So
something more easier to say or cooler or something like that.
at some point in time, and Brian and I have been kind of talking about this, we are going to do an entire podcast just on naming. Because
Ugh.
believe it or not, if you're not in the industry, naming is one of the most difficult things that you can do. That's why
I've
you keep
had
hearing companies that
CEOs
have terrible names.
I've had CEOs say directly to me, "Can you help us figure out a name?" And I look at
Yeah.
them with a little smile and I go, "Sure." Like it is so hard, right? It's like marketing departments cringe.
Sometimes the answer is just no.
Yeah.
Because there are times when it's just too hard. Like coming up with a name, people don't think about this too much because they think, why don't you just come up with a great name? It's really hard. And we'll talk about why it's really hard and what what strategies we found have been kind of helpful, but like it's a huge challenge. But anyway, yeah,
Anyways, so let's talk
all of
about
the
Waymo for
Waymo
a
name.
second. Yeah, let's talk about Waymo. So as mentioned before, it's logged 1 million miles with no driver assist, which is technically level 4 because it's sequestered to Phoenix, Arizona, and San Francisco, California, and going at slower
Mhm.
speeds. But what's really, really interesting is this summer, I believe in early July, they are seeking approval to start charging customers for rides. So right now,
Mhm.
what it is, and you had told me about this, D, actually, just anecdotally, but like, is that you can request one of those cars, and then it kind of puts you in a lottery, and then hopefully you get it because a lot of people request them to try them out. But they don't charge you for it; it's actually free. And the reason why they don't charge you for it is because they don't have the basically the regulation in line in order to do so. So they are seeking approval for it this summer, and if they do, that means that they can start actually generating revenue from these rides, which is really interesting.
Mhm.
Um, as I said, they're in Phoenix and San Francisco. Phoenix is a great model. It's very flat. It's very simple. There's people there that are super, super interested in trying out the technology. Same thing with San Francisco. San Francisco is hard because there's a lot of hills and a lot of craziness that happens in the city. So it's kind of cool that they're also over there, testing out their technology. Uh, it is very, very useful for people who cannot drive. I've had this thought, like my parents are getting older and they're in great shape and they drive and all that kind of stuff. But maybe one day they're like, I don't want to drive anymore. I don't feel comfortable driving anymore. It's so cool to have an option that is autonomous, not just with someone driving you around. Right? You might feel more comfortable knowing that there's no one in the vehicle except for you. And so I find it really interesting. On how people are going to internalize this. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I just want to point out that Waymo's been at this since 2009, and they are looking to expand their technology and kind of go beyond where they are in Phoenix, which is about 180 square miles, to other areas around the country and around the world eventually. But something really interesting happened recently. So Waymo actually partnered with Uber. And the reason why I say that is because there was a lawsuit between Waymo and Uber because an employee had left Waymo and taken technology to Uber. They got sued over intellectual property. You can look it up. It's like a huge big deal. So we all kind of thought there was a little bit of bad blood between them, but business is business, right? So they put those things aside and they partnered with them, and it's working out really well. And the way this partnership works is that Waymo will be able to riders will be able to hail a Waymo vehicle directly through the Waymo app or through the Uber app or Uber Eats app. So they're basically using the marketing power and the power of Uber's broad spectrum grab of so many users basically around the country as a
Mhm.
way of driving people into the autonomous vehicles. So it's actually a really good partnership because you can just bring up the Uber app, which a lot of people use, click give me an autonomous Waymo, and boom, here it comes. So what do you think about this partnership and their companies putting aside their disputes and working together?
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think this is one of the reasons why I was mentioning kind of like whoever is going to come in first and be that first mover is going to form these kinds of relationships because they're the biggest names in this area. And once they do, it becomes difficult for the competitors to step in also. So
Mm-hmm.
if for example, Waymo has this relationship with Uber and then they form another one with Lyft, those are the two biggest names. That's probably 80+% of the market share for ride hailing services.
Yeah.
Uh, I want to point something out real quick when it comes to level 4 autonomous driving. So that means that I believe you said before, it's kind of geofenced and works fully self-driving within a certain kind of area. And moving
Yeah.
outside of that area, the vehicle actually shuts down and you have to take over. I think it's driving this use case around ride hailing services rather than just being integrated into the vehicle, an owned vehicle, because
Yeah.
then the ride hailing assumes that, okay, this is going to work within, this city or whatnot. It's one of the
Mm-hmm.
reasons why it's more city focused and less outside of the cities. It's also one of the things I think Tesla runs into because it is an owned vehicle and it can go anywhere. it doesn't really make sense or as much sense within an owned vehicle, because you're not going to be limiting your owned vehicle to driving within a certain radius.
Yeah,
So
they're going to benefit most when all of these regulations get dropped, and you just have to, not dropped, but I mean, I shouldn't say it. When all these regulations are fully cured and it's very clear about what it is that you need to do in order to reach that goal so that you can allow your vehicle on the road, right?
yeah.
And once that happens, then I think Tesla will take its place and kind of do its thing. But like, it's a completely different service. It's the idea that like I have a Tesla at my house and it can drive me around and I don't have to focus on driving. That's great. That's one use case. The other use case is, well, maybe 4 out of 5 days I work from home and I don't even take my Tesla anywhere. So I let my Tesla go off and become an autonomous vehicle and work for me and make me money. Right.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting model. Now I don't know how I feel about that, because car ownership in the past and present has been kind of like, this is my car. People feel it almost like a sense of their home, you know? And so
Hmm.
if you're sending your car off and it's picking people up and all that, are they getting even junk in your car? Like, how do you feel about that? Right. There's a lot of psychology around that I'm not sure how it's going to unfold. I would be okay with it, assuming that I could thoroughly, like, clean the car or control where the people are sitting. Maybe they only get to sit in the back and it's blocked off from the front. I have no idea, but I would definitely explore it and try it. But I know that some people are going to have issues with it. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel like Tesla is tackling an entirely different challenge at this point
completely, completely.
than what the other services are, because they're doing a ride hailing service. They can constrict it to a certain area. They can leverage level 4 in order to deliver a service. And they can roll that out to different cities. Because one of the limitations, we talked about this before on self driving, and this is actually an AI issue, right? There is AI that's controlling these vehicles, and that AI needs to be trained. They need to be trained on different locations. So one of the things that Google Waymo, and Cruise, and these other ride-hailing services can do is they can roll them out city by city, like they did with Lyft and Lime and Uber and all these models before. Like, we're bringing this to this location. Uh, and they can use that as a means of training the vehicles on those roads, so they can understand how these roads operate, what to look out for, so on and so forth. Um, and they can just roll them out, and gradually they keep adding more geolocations over time, and that will eventually help to train the overall algorithm for level 5, where you can take your
Hmm.
vehicle anywhere. Tesla almost has to, it's kind of getting pushed, because it's an ownership model more, into jumping right to level 5, which means they need to train all of their vehicles on all the roads out there kind of all at once. It's one of the reasons why level 5 is so much further out there. So I think in that sense, it's kind of putting them in a difficult situation. And then I've read this thing. I don't know exactly how accurate it is, but well mentioned there are questions that Tesla and Elon is not being completely truthful when they're saying they're at level 2 autonomous driving. They are
Yeah.
saying that they're putting out level 4 while claiming level 2 in order to circumvent regulations, which is an issue, because we've seen, according to some websites out there, I'm seeing somewhere between like 33 deaths attributed to Tesla Autopilot at this point,
Hmm.
where Waymo is currently associated with zero.
Yeah.
So
There's
there is a
also
question
there's also a
about,
lot more Teslas out there, to be fair. Like, what I mean? The Waymos are controlled in these little cities and stuff like that, and there's just
yeah.
tons of Teslas. So it would make
So
sense that you would have issues with technology for sure.
we don't know that 100%. Number one
Yeah.
is because the total Tesla deaths are in the hundreds.
Hmm.
That's so these are deaths that are associated specifically with autopilot. So the one you would do is you would compare deaths per 100,000 miles driven or something like that. So we
Yeah.
don't necessarily know. We can't compare apples to oranges. You'd assume that the autopilot has a lot more miles. There's also been a lot more different versions of autopilot that's been available to the public, where Waymo has restricted the public use for quite a bit. And there's ethical concerns with all of that.
Mhm. So how does this play into companies like Hertz or Hertz Rent a Car or Dollar Rent a Car? These services that we all tend to use when we, land in Oahu, Hawaii, and we need a car to drive around, or you land in Vegas and you're like, oh, I have to go to 5 different sites in order to talk to clients or whatever it is. Are we under the assumption that the second that these things are available, suddenly these brands will just license all of this technology and just go fully autonomous, and or maybe have like a small fleet of people who want to drive regular cars, and then just have a ton of autonomous vehicles that are available?
Well, I mean, from a business model perspective, I would be doing exactly what they're doing, what Uber is doing with Waymo, which is let's copy that agreement. Let's convert half of our fleet or three-quarters of our fleet to level 4 fully self-driving for everyone to say like, all right, these cars are for available within this certain mile radius, because most people when they rent a car, if they're going to a major city, they're going to stay within a certain radius of that. Like if you're going to Hawaii and it could get rated level 4 for the entire island of Oahu or Kauai, then you could just get that from from Hertz or some other rental car. And if they're not being rented, you could just put them out on the street as a competitor to Uber. You just uh, ride hail your Hertz car, and then it comes pick you up and takes you where you
I
need to
mean,
go.
I see it as like, I don't mind using an Uber or a Lyft or whatever it is. Um, I do like the idea of not having anyone else in the car. I think it's kind of cool, and I can imagine being in a situation where it's like, why would I even rent a car? Right? Like you just take
Sure.
let's say you're using Hertz or whatever, and the car picks you up in Oahu and drops you off at your hotel. 2 days later, you want to go out to the North Shore, you just hail another one. It's there in 5 minutes and takes you out to the North Shore. Right? It's like I feel like that's the model where you don't have to like constantly store a car or you know pay for parking overnight and all that. Just get rid of all those inconveniences that are for the average user.
Well, I can see if you're going to New York or if you're going to LA or if you're going to Las Vegas, or Chicago, I can see just use the Waymo all the time. Or whatever, whoever that's through. Maybe that's Hertz, maybe that's Uber, and maybe that's Lyft, maybe it's whoever else, right? But I think that kind of is the model, leveraging existing infrastructure in order to deliver the self driving service. And when you're going to Hawaii, that's the time when you're like, okay, well, I'm going to the North Shore. I want to bring my snorkeling gear with me,
Yeah.
where I need a car in order to store my cameras or to have to put my wet towels in on the way back or something like that. So, or I'm going to carry lunch with me. So that's a situation where I can imagine that like maybe you are renting a or booking a self-driving car for the day for your day
Hmm.
trip, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to the road to Hana, for example, then you'd want it for the day at least. And then you get back from the North Shore, and instead of having to worry where you're going to park it in your Airbnb in Waikiki, you just let it go for the day, and it goes back to its Hertz parking lot, wherever that happens to be.
Exactly, and then it gets cleaned and serviced, and it's off to help someone else, right?
Yeah,
Like, I really like that model a lot. I actually think it's from a user perspective, it's very friendly, it's very simple.
yeah,
It's going to change everything. I mean, it's going to make everything we did in the past look very archaic.
yeah.
The way we handled things.
But these are all different use cases than just like this is the car that's in my garage, right?
Yeah.
So the car in your garage, you can probably work within level 4 as long as you understand that it's level 4 and if you take it outside of like a certain area. But if most people are driving back and forth to work and to the grocery store and a few other things each day, as long as that's within their predetermined geofence for a level 4 automation, that's fine. But I think there's an expectation that I can take my car anywhere. That's kind of one of the conceits for the assumptions for car ownership, especially in the United States, of like, this is my car, it's associated with freedom and flexibility of movement and all those things. And now you end up in kind of this odd kind of user experience situation of like, all right, I'm going from San Francisco to LA. I want to self drive the entire way, but once I get to Altamont Pass, I have to drive myself. And
Hmm.
those are really the parts like going down Highway 5 or Highway 101. Those are the ones you most want automated. But it's also
Absolutely.
the areas that are similar to where we've seen the most accidents was associated with full self driving
Well,
because
this is
of
the
the
reason
lack
why
of
we're seeing so
information
many
around it.
trucks and things like that, getting automated, right? Like all the different
Mhm.
fleets where they drive in the middle of the night on a straight road for, 12 or 14 hours straight. There's not a lot of people around, that kind of stuff, right? It makes sense in those areas. The regulation and all that kind of stuff is super important. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think wrapping your head around it could be like, do I certify the vehicle or the company or the car or whatever you want to call it as a level, or do I certify areas as levels? So it's like
Yeah.
Oahu's a level 5, Vegas is a level 5, San Francisco is a level 4, for whatever reason, right? But like figuring that out makes me realize how important it's going to be to have technology minded people in office and stuff like that can help interpret a lot of this um, technology and how it works. You know what I mean? Do
Yeah, I think that's definitely an area where we're lacking is a lot of the people in office are not very versed in this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I look at this and I say there's a lot of different use cases. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I think that again, whoever owns this, can you imagine? Okay, so we talked about the ride hailing service. Let's talk a little bit more about what a kind of a user experience and business model might be for the car in your garage that you own, right?
Okay.
Maybe now people want when it comes to owning a car, the type of car is important. They don't necessarily want to buy the generic Waymo car or even a
Hmm.
generic Tesla car, right? They want to pick and choose what car represents them. Now, can you imagine if, Waymo or somebody else, but let's assume Waymo because I think a lot of these companies would prefer to have a relationship with the Google company
Uh-huh.
rather than unless it was owned by them themselves. Just saying, like, all right, well, this is built into your car. We are paying a small licensing fee plus the different hardware for sensors and things in order to get this integrated into your car. This can cost a little bit more because it has the technology built into it. Now imagine that in order to kind of fully use this, that kind of level 4 automation, there's a monthly fee. Maybe it's even somewhat nominal, 10 or $20 a month, but you have millions of cars on the road and you're just maintaining infrastructure like your data centers and that kind of thing in order to get those connections out there. Which for Google you're kind of doing anyway because you're maintaining Google Maps and the other navigation service that they have that I forgot the name of
Hmm.
because I haven't been using it for a while. Like
Ways.
you can waste. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Now you can have millions of customers paying you $10 a month for a full self driving thing that's totally worth it because now I don't have to pay attention when I'm driving. I can go on a road trip and take a nap and wake up in Yosemite.
Yeah, I mean,
So
this is essentially what Tesla does, right? You have to pay for
yeah.
all these upgrades, and now all the other automakers are following suit, and they're doing the same thing where you pay for upgrades. And it's basically that whole idea of having an iPhone on wheels, right? Is that you can
Mhm.
pay for certain things. It's like over the air updates and things like that. You basically buy into the things that you need or services you need, whether it be monthly or a one time fee, and then suddenly your vehicle now has these capabilities, and they're all
Yeah,
doing it now.
I think this is a totally different avenue than like paying for the heated seats that are already built into it, right?
Totally. Yep.
That does not require any kind of AI maintenance and algorithm and data centers in order to make sure that your seat is getting heated properly. That's ridiculous, and I think this is a different realm than those kinds of microtransactions, which are terrible. This is more like paying for like a like paying for a Netflix or paying for something like that, where you're actually getting kind of a content delivered to your vehicle in order to make the driving possible.
Yeah. What do you think it takes though, D, from thinking from the seat of the user, right? Especially a more naive user, meaning somebody who's not like reading every article about self-driving cars and wanting to test their technology all the time. You take somebody who just says, "Oh, okay, so they're coming out with self-driving cars where, there'll be no one in the car except for the computer that drives me around." What do you think it takes to move someone from fear to a sense of like this is just normal and I'm okay with it? Because I've been reading a lot of articles about the fear around it. There's like
Mhm.
half of the people are excited and just love getting in cars and they trust technology, and younger people very much do. And then there's this whole subset of people that are like, oh my God, like, I don't know. I mean, what happens if I get in the car and it starts zooming 100 miles an hour? Or they have a lot of what ifs in their head and they're fearful of it. Do you think it's like
Mhm.
everything else? whether it be fearful of using computers or fearful of, riding on an electric scooter for the first time or anything else, where it's just going to take time to overcome it? Or do you think they're going to have a specific kind of user experience model built in that eases people into the comfort of doing this?
Well, there's a mechanism, by the way, how this happens, right? We've seen this happen before. We worked on payment systems when they were first
Yeah,
coming online with PayPal and those other companies for
that's a
taking
great
payment.
example. Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, early days it wasn't very well trusted. People were not using it, or if they were going and getting like prepaid credit cards, so they wouldn't be exposing their credit information to Amazon and so on and so forth. And eventually, by people trying it out and seeing that nothing bad happened, and the kind of the fraud protection that sprung up on the other side of things, it became much more accepted. But there's an important mechanism within this process that was important there. It's important here. It's probably more so here than it was before, which is the importance of those early adopters. So ensuring those early adopters have good, safe, positive experiences, then they
Mm-hmm.
will advocate to the second wave and the laggards and everybody else to try this out, or to come hop in my new Volkswagen Jetta that has Waymo integrated into it and see how cool this is. Then they'll have the normal experience. They'll try it a few times. They'll see that person isn't dying in a fiery car wreck, and they'll say, "Hey, my next car, why don't I get this as an option?" And knowing Google, if they do the like $10 a month in order to sign up for the service, it'll probably be like all of their other uh, services that you pay for. Where it's like, hey, I don't need this month, and I want to save a bit of money. I'm just going to cancel it, and if I want it next month, I'll sign up for it again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And it's about gently introducing the technology, because like someone asked me the other day, they said, "What would you say to somebody who said, I ain't getting one of those vehicles. It's super scary. I don't know what's going to happen." And I said, I would probably say to them, "Hey, it's had 1,000,000 miles with no accidents. It's only going to go 30 miles per hour, and we're only going to go around the block to start." And then kind of ease them into it and just go around the block and say, "Okay, this is what it feels like." And then if they like it,
Mhm.
say, "Okay, let's go around the block twice," and just kind of like do very simple things, very close locations to start before you're like, "Hey, get on the freeway and drive 60 miles an hour up to San Francisco," right? It's
Yeah,
like all of it is about easing people in, and I feel the same way. Like, I have a different concern. My concern is that the vehicle is too safe and people are going to be honking all around me going like, "Get out of the way." And like, it's going to be like a weird experience
they just
because,
need soundproofing for that.
yeah, because the funny thing about it is that, that was addressed. So the CEO of the Waymo unit was on Kara Swisher's podcast, and she said, "It's definitely a concern. Like they're figuring out how you can interpret the law of like you drive 25 miles an hour on the street, but then that's kind of not the way it works. The way it works is the flow of traffic, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes people drive 30, 35 miles an hour because people want to get to where they're going and it's considered flow and no one gets tickets for that. And so that's hard for AI to figure out how to understand that some of the laws can be massaged a little bit in order
Well,
to go with the flow of traffic, in order to kind of do what humans do.
I don't think it's that difficult for a AI system to recognize how quickly the rest of the traffic is going. That is a safety thing. If you're going slower than the flow of traffic, you're obstructing traffic, and you're creating kind of a safety hazard because people could run into you.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
that's going to be that hard for them to get around. I think they'll eventually get there. They might already be there. They might be choosing to go at slower speeds in order to make people more comfortable, like you pointed out. But I think that where like it's interesting to me that that Waymo went from Phoenix to San Francisco, because San
Mhm.
Francisco is one of the worst places to drive. It's one of the things that one of the reasons why I prefer to live just outside of San Francisco, because they're narrow streets. There's lots of hills. There's lots of pedestrians popping out behind cars that are parked packed on the side of the road. There's people who are just stopping in the middle of the road and throwing on their hazards while they hop out of their car for a minute. There's a lot of different unusual factors. It's not like Phoenix or even San Jose or LA, where you have big, wide open streets and lots of space. So it's much more predictable environments. It's kind of like driving around in Manhattan or Boston, Boston might be the worst place because it's Boston, but it's a difficult and challenging place for an AI in order to capture, because they have to be aware of so many different simultaneous factors. So if they can get it really working perfectly in San Francisco, then I think the sky is kind of the limit.
Well, I think that's why they did it, right? It's like I was talking to somebody who sails. I've gone out. You've gone out. Excuse me. Oh, so tired. I've gone out sailing in the San Francisco Bay. I don't sail. I sit there and do what people tell me to do. But people who are experienced sea captains, no, they go and they sail around the bay, and I've gone with them a bunch of times, and so have you. And every time I've gone with somebody different, they've said to me, "If you could learn how to sail here," they said, "take lessons and learn how to sail here. You can go anywhere you want." Because
Yep.
the San Francisco Bay is so challenging. It's kind of the same model, right? Like, why not just like train your system to be super efficient in this really challenging area called San Francisco, and then when it goes everywhere else, it's kind of cake, right? So
Yeah.
it makes sense that they would do it, and also their offices are here, and it's easy to grab the car and just take off and test it and that kind of stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, between that and then just capturing that rural kind of Highway 5 open road kind of situation,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of the big cities, the more sprawling suburban style cities, and then kind of the wide open road of rural and agricultural areas. Then all you're doing then is you're creating models
Mm-hmm.
for the AI training, and you're applying those same rules in different specific locations around the country, and it can really speed up your training for those locations.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap up with a prediction. So this is something that I've been thinking about, D. For a little while now, and I kind of meditated on it the other day. And I started thinking about self driving cars and the technology and all that stuff. And I thought, what is actually happening? I'm listening to the partnerships, I'm listening to how everyone's communicating with one another. And here's what I think is going to happen. I think that eventually Google is going to buy Uber for sure.
Interesting.
Yes. So the fact is that Uber has the audience, Google has the technology. What a better partnership. You deliver all the vehicles and the technology to Uber, and Uber becomes part of your brand. And that is how you get your ride hailing service to just grow exponentially, right? Once that happens and they start to take market share, then you're going to see consolidation across other companies as well. So Amazon Zook might buy Hertz, or you're going to see those partnerships start to happen. And during that transition, one of the big automakers, one of the biggest in the world, maybe like GM or something like that, will get acquired by a technology company. And it's
Wow.
and I know that these companies say that they'll never sell, and like you've heard things like that. It's an institution, it's been here forever. But this is an inflection point, almost kind of like the advent of new modern technology and things like that. And I just feel like I could sense it's coming, and I could see
Mhm.
like GM getting to where it needs to go, and then suddenly getting acquired by Tesla, or getting, maybe not Tesla, but Apple or something like that, right? Because here's something that happened the other day that really kind of clicked in. So Tesla now has this charging partnership with General Motors, right? And basically, they're saying you can use all of our charging stations. So Tesla's essentially kind of owning the whole kind of like charging space, and it's growing bigger and bigger. I think that's just the beginning. I think exactly what you said earlier. These companies are going to license technology from the technology companies. So they're going to go to Tesla and say, "Oh, now I want your batteries. Now I want your display, right?" And or they might go to Google and say, "I need your self-driving car, but I also need this, I need that." Apple's going to offer services as well. I think they already have like some stuff that they lease to companies. But this is just kind of like the beginning of it. And then once the industry really starts to unfold, these acquisitions are going to happen, and they're going to squeeze together. But I think that the big prediction is, I really do think Google is going to buy Uber. I think it makes a lot of sense.
I am going to disagree with part of what you said and agree with another part. I don't think Google is going, or Alphabet is going to buy Uber.
Yeah, I
And
should
the
say
reason
Alphabet.
is, yeah, the reason is because I don't think they want to get into that situation that Pepsi got into when they bought Taco Bell and uh, KFC in those restaurants, which was They started putting their product in those restaurants, and that meant that every other restaurant out there, fast food restaurant, ended up signing up with Coke instead. I think that is something to be avoided. I don't think they want all of the other services out there to align against them.
Yeah.
Um,
I think this is different though. And the only reason why I say that is because I, I don't think that the end user cares about which autonomous vehicle is coming for them. I think it's about which is kind of the most available in the moment. And if you can grab such a large user base in one shot, you're going to have this market that will naturally grow over time. They may not need to try to grab anyone else, right? Or acquire any other
I don't know that they
companies.
need to grab to buy them in order to get that user base. I think they just form a sweetheart deal with them, and then do the same thing with Lyft, and then they make their money on kind of the back end with like smaller, maybe even per ride charges.
They could, but
But
these big tech companies, they don't like to have deals with people. They like to own everything. You know what I mean?
I mean, I don't think Google looks at it that way. I mean, you look at how they have rolled out their software systems. I mean, they don't own the hardware that their search engine shows up on.
Hmm.
You know, they have a browser, but they don't really do that very much with hardware. And I can see it a little bit more with them buying a car manufacturer. So that's what the part that I'm going to agree with. But I actually think it would probably be Amazon with their Zoox product, because they're trying to, right. That was Amazon. Am I remembering
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
correctly?
yeah.
So if we end up in a situation where, like, so I'm gonna hit my prediction and tie it to yours, right? So my prediction is that we're gonna end up in a Windows, Mac, or Android, iOS kind of situation, right?
Hmm.
Where you have one company that is going to provide the software systems that are going to be licensed out to all the different hardware manufacturers. I think that's going to be Waymo. I think they're
Hmm.
going to license it to anybody who wants it. It's going to be free or nearly free, and then they'll have other ways in order to kind of monetize beyond that. And then I think the using the Apple model, where it is purpose built hardware software combined, is going to be the Tesla model. And that is the one where, all right, you buy your car, you have Tesla's full self driving, and the hardware is married to the software, and you're getting a vehicle that maybe has uh, more attractive design, and maybe better, more hardware engineering, kind of like their production engineering, kind of the way that Apple does. So if you want that kind of walled garden hardware software combination, then you have the Tesla option. If you want the other model where you buy whatever hardware you want, then you can add the software to it. That I think is going to be the Waymo model. And then where this is partially based on what I think of these companies from their culture and what they've done in the past. But looking at Bezos and Zoox, I can totally see them buying a company like GM or Ford. Ford might not want to sell, but a car manufacturer as a way of breaking into the market, and then saying, okay, we're going to do kind of what Tesla's doing, where we're putting our software onto our vehicles, and we're buying the manufacturing capacity,
Hmm.
because it's really hard to get vehicle manufacturing up and running from scratch. So it's one of the reasons why I think the current hardware or the current automotive manufacturers are going to be in a bit of a controlling seat as far as who they form the relationships with.
Sure.
And that will be kind of the dark horse third player.
See, I've always kind of looked at it as like that's a good prediction because I've always looked at Amazon and thought, well, if I was Amazon, I would buy Federal Express and I would take my autonomous technology and I would deploy it across all FedEx trucks or whatever it is and make everything in service of my big business, which is my business of logistics and distribution. And then eventually license out all of my vehicles and technology to anyone who wants to do logistics and distribution and stay away from the consumer market.
I could totally see them doing that. I think that's one of the reasons why they are really buying into this. I think that Bezos' main focus when it comes to self driving in general, is to improve their logistics for delivery. Because it's built into what they're doing already. Like what Amazon does really well, their superpower is really in logistics.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, And that's, I mean, you look at the different companies. Google, their superpower is data. Apple, their superpower is actually manufacturing capabilities.
Yep.
Uh, they manufacture products, hardware at a better level than anyone I've ever seen. And you look at Amazon, it's really logistics and getting that product to that place better than
Hmm.
anyone else out there. So for
Yeah.
them to then say, okay, well, now we're able to do that at a higher level. We're able to continue to scale up without scaling our human costs of delivery, and not to mention all the different giant trucks on the road. We can put small vehicles out there, maybe even like, modified bikes to go out there and deliver packages.
Yep.
Then that's just lets us continue to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be in service of the bigger goal. And Amazon's always really stayed true to being in service of the consumer and being in service of distribution of product, right? And
Mhm.
so if they can own this whole new space, I mean, that puts them in position to be a continued direct partner or direct uh, kind of worldwide distributor, even outside of the Amazon network. Like the point I was trying to get at is like Amazon's humongous. But then you look at also how FedEx is huge, and so is UPS, and so is all these others. If you really want to kind of take them down and own logistics, you have to basically own the technology that makes logistics easier, cheaper, and faster, right? And then eventually, like, absorb the brand and then grab their customers, and that's how it
Mhm.
kind of unfolds. And this is like the beginning of that. And I say beginning, I mean the very beginning of that. I mean that's you're talking about a 20-year plan, but
Yeah.
I think it's going to work out. But hey, this was fun. I think there's a lot going on in this space, and I'm excited that we jumped in and talked about it. And next week we have a completely different topic. So that was great. So thanks, Steve, for that. And thanks, everyone, so much for taking the time to listen to us today. We really appreciate it. If you have any comments, please leave them on the YouTube page at the X Podcast. And please subscribe to our channel. We've gotten a few comments on there and appreciated it. Also, if you like this podcast, found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you subscribe or leave a review on whatever platform you use. And don't forget to share with a friend. So thanks, everyone, and we will see you all next week.